Here we're going to finish up looking at how stats can help us think critically about current ongoing social issues. And also we're going to pay attention once again about the importance of methodology and how data is collected. So to give you kind of a background, we're going to work with the data set that you have in your textbook on IQ and brain volume. And to kind of help you understand why this is such an important topic, why this keeps coming up, we kind of have to go back just a little bit historically. So early research, as researchers got along, we found that as humans have evolved, our brain capacity has gotten larger, right, as measured in cubic centimeters. Now, tied in with that is the assumption that we are, in fact, becoming more intelligent through evolution. There is good reasons for supporting that assumption. We don't actually have, of course, a testing system that we can go back and give IQ tests to or other factors like that, but humans have become increasingly more adaptive as we have evolved. That is pretty historically accurate and scientifically accurate. However, the problem we get into with this data is when people extrapolate from species evolution to individuals. So something that may be true for a species over time, taking that and saying, well, that is something that we could also apply to all humans currently living at the same time without any really critical thinking about it, is a serious problem. That's taking one trend that we're seeing historically through evolution and saying we're going to apply that now to distinguish not between humans and evolution, but between different types of humans. All right, and we're gonna use this to decide who is the more intelligent human. So that is a gigantic shift from using a methodological approach that's true for something evolutionarily wise and applying it to all current people living. So this leads us historically into a great deal of trouble. So here you can see I tracked down a nice little source. It's done in 1995. There was a review of all the world literature on brain size at that time. And you can see here they go through and look at cranial capacity. They're looking at it in CM, and then we were looking at IQ differences, right? Now, here's where this becomes particularly problematic. They didn't simply look at just across all people. They broke them down by regionally defined racial groups. So here we can see they're looking at African American descended people, and they're looking at their cranial capacity, and then looking at their IQ. And they're doing the same thing for people of European descent and East Asian descent people. This moves this type of research into a very dangerous area of defining some races as genetically superior to others, which is apparently, if you've studied history, apparently one of mankind's most dangerous and favorite activities to do. So our literature and our history is full of one group of individuals defining themselves as being a wee bit better than everybody else, ergo they deserve better treatment. So, and much of this stuff, race becomes a shorthand for brain volume. So keep in mind, the first connection is between brain volume and IQ. All right, now we're looking at that particular one, and they're looking at regional based differences. But over time, of course, measuring brain volume is not something you can do with someone who's alive, very accurate. So race becomes the shorthand version of inferring brain volume. So we begin to see research looking at race-based differences in IQ, and most disturbingly, IQ begins to become a catch-all for morals, ethics, values, etc. Now, if this sounds like this is something back from a very extended period of time, it does in fact come out from the time period when the UK was moving into its massive empire state. So it is traveling globally, setting up its own empires all over the globe. And one of the ways that you can explain, justify, and rationalize going in and supplanting an entire group of people, their government and their rights, and imposing yourself upon them is to be able to say that, well, we're ultimately helping them in the long run because they just don't have as good of morals and values as we do. They're not as smart as we are. So therefore, us dominating them actually is to their advantage. Okay, so through this work, scientific findings begin to be used to support differential treatment based on observed race. Now notice again, it's observed race, so it tends to be skin tone and hair texture were the two most common ones that were used at this time period to distinguish race. So we're beginning to see these scientific findings using to support differential treatment. Now keep in mind, this differential treatment was already occurring. It did not move out of the scientific findings It was already happening, and the scientific findings were then used afterwards to support it and maintain it. So science gets used to support this historically repeated quest of one group of people to claim superiority over another group of people. And the ultimate outcome of this is being used to justify genocide. So here we can see on the left-hand side is a picture from Auschwitz. So here we can see how Jewish individuals were treated when they were seen as being genetically different and subhuman. It's important to realize that that was the basis Hitler used for treating these people this way and getting rid of them, that they were actually literally a contamination for other human beings. It's important to understand Hitler actually didn't just stop with the Jewish people. He also defined Polish people as being inferior. And that was necessary to explain why, after the fact, why Germany invaded Poland and took over its government. He did the same thing for Danish people and other people of European descent. So according to Hitler, this is the basis of the German as being the superior race in all characteristics. And it was used to rationalize and justify his multiple invasions and then get the attempted genocide of Jewish people. Here on the right, you can see a picture from a more recent problem. This is Rwanda. So this was the genocide in Rwanda, where we can see the mass graves that are happening. Now, notice one thing that's interesting here is currently a lot of the race-based conversations in the United States of America is based along a black and white line. But it's really important to understand that, for example, when Hitler enacted it, Jews are also Euro-American in many appearances. The Poles and the Danish were, of course, Euro-American, as were the French. So at a certain point, this moves beyond skin tone and is used as a rationalization for treating any group of people as inferior and taking away their human rights. So we see the same thing here in Rwanda, where we can see people of African American descent attempting to engage in ethnic cleansing, just as Hitler tried to do with the Jews, and literally eliminate a group of people. So when we're looking at this, it's important to understand you would be looking at this IQ and brain volume data, being like, that's silly. Why does anybody care at all? But it does matter a lot, and you will actually still find a lot of this information discussed by people and brought up. There was a study published in just 2003 that tried to reaffirm a lot of this stuff. There was another one that came out just a couple of years ago, and it's still being cited on a lot of websites. So this is one of the places when I'm looking at social media and conversation rooms, this material keeps coming up again and again. So it's important that we think critically about it and be able to understand here, these are certainly numbers. These are true. We're not questioning that. But we're going to be questioning what else is wrapped up in these numbers besides a strict IQ test mark of intelligence. And there's a lot of things that are packaged into this particular issue. So there's a couple of things these studies neglected. The first is that IQ tests are a socially constructed measure, and they naturally emphasize the traits of the population who designed them and who they feel are most important. So here you can see on the right a cartoon pointing out the double edge of this, where you have somebody who's an anthropologist with a PhD going and doing work with what we would think of as being some more indigenous and previously defined more primitive people. And you hear the indigenous person giving them the results of their tests. You say, you can't build a hut, you don't know how to find edible roots, and you know nothing about predicting the weather. In other words, you do terribly on our IQ tests. IQ tests built by humans are going to be shaped by human flaws and agendas and goals. It's also important to pay attention that even within the realm of evolution doesn't maintain that we become smarter per se. It means simply we become more flexible. So what is an important characteristic or trait for survival or for success within your current society is based on what resources you have available and what skills are necessary. So if we're living in a more rural, indigenous area, being able to find edible food, being able to build a hut becomes very important. In our society, we tend not to feel that that's terribly important. If you want a house, you hire somebody to come build the house. We do not go out and dig our edible roots. We have other characteristics that we need, skills that we need to be able to engage in order to survive. The other thing that's not considered in this stuff is well-documented factors shaping IQ. So three of the ones that are very well documented are environmental resources. So the more stimulating the environment as the child is growing up in it, we know that produces more neurological connections and synaptic gaps between for transmitting messages. Nutrition is also essential. Neurons are a biological component that is built based on your nutrition. If you do not have sufficient nutrition at certain points in time, your body will not have the biological resources necessary to build the neurons and the very subtle and important synaptogenic gaps between them. Lastly, we also know parental interaction is really important. Now, this is an important distinction from environmental resources. Environmental resources are things that are available in my area, toys, activities, things like that. Parental interaction is the parents' interaction with the children and how much they're engaging with their child and how much they're helping them and directing their exploration of their environment. We know all three of these things heavily affect IQ scores. A fourth thing I have not included here because there's still ongoing data in it, but is being shown to be a really strong factor, is when we're looking at discrimination. So we do know that experiences of discrimination have short-term effects on people's ability to perform complex tasks. So an example from that study would be, of looking at that, would be a field study that was done at a major engineering conference. And they went up to women who were engineers, so these are women who were very successful in their field at this conference. And these women either interacted with a supportive male colleague who was interested and engaged with what they were doing and treated them respectfully, or they interacted with a sexist colleague who was very dismissive of them and was very discriminatory towards them. So right after this interaction, the female engineer was approached and asked to complete a assessment of their engineering knowledge. And these are some very subtle and complex problems they're being asked to solve. What they found was the women that interacted with the discriminatory colleague scored 10 to 15 points lower than the women that interacted with the respectful colleague. So, and most importantly, then they came back and had these women complete a very similar test 2 days later after these events are finished, and they found that those women whose scores had been 10 to 15 points lower actually came back up to the normal set in congruence with their peers. So we know, for example, in that particular scenario, that a woman interacting with a discriminatory experience actually temporarily inhibits their ability to perform these really complex high-level assessments. And so there's a lot of questions about how that would play out if you experience that repeatedly across your development in your career and what kind of effects that would take. But that's evidence. It's still ongoing, not quite as certain. So we're going to look currently just at these three that are very well documented: environmental resources, nutrition, and parental interaction. So we're going to take a look at a data set that took these factors into account. So you've got data set number 16. It's pulled from a 1998 study that's looking at IQ and brain size. So if you look at that data, you can see that they're looking at identical twins. So they're controlling a certain amount of the genetic component. And they're doing a straight comparison. You can do a straight comparison from IQ and brain volume. However, notice with that data set, we have not actually controlled for environment, nutrition, or parental interaction. To do this, we must first calculate the differences between the twins in each pair. So you want to create a new column with this information and calculate it and interpret it. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is go through and take your data set for each pair. So you've got your pair 1, pair 2, pair 3, all the way down to pair number 10. So looking at that set of data, go over a couple of columns, set a new column, label it pair, list it 1 through 10 because we're going to do 10 pairs. In the next column, list that as, you're going to want to be listing that as the difference in IQ. And then the next one is going to be, third column is going to be difference and volume. Now, you're going to take the first individual student, the first child listed in pair 1, and you're going to look at their IQ, and you're going to take that and you're going to subtract from it the IQ for child 2. That's your difference in IQ. We're currently just going to use the pairs as they're presented in order. Okay, so you're going to take that and list that over as the difference in IQ. Now and you're going to do this for each pair. Now some of those values will be negative. That's fine. Then you're going to do the same thing for the brain volume. So pause the video, go through and make these calculations and move everything over. All right, and this is a really important part of working with data, is being able to take the data you've got and reorganize it to address the methodological concerns you have, and also then be able to use StatsCrunch to analyze it. So Once you've got that set, turn the video back on and we'll move on to the next step together. So if you go through and then you take your data and you plot it out, setting your IQ differences as value X and your brain volume as value Y, you're going to see that there appears to be at least an outlier. So we have something unusual going on there. But keep in mind, without a reason to remove it, we're going to have to proceed with that outlier. We can't just take it out. So now that we've got that, go through and take a look and go, what is the strength of this potential relationship? So go through and run your StatsCrunch Pearson correlation calculation and pause the video while you do that. And then when you get your value, let's come back and take a look at that together. You should have gotten 0.058. So we're looking at that value. What is the strength of this relationship, this potential relationship? Well, it's none. There's nothing here. So when we're looking at this, once we start having some data that we've controlled for various factors that we know influence IQ performance, such as the environmental resources available to the child, looking at it in terms of nutrition, and also looking at parental interaction. So we're working on the basic assumption that parents don't treat their twins differently. They're going to be treated relatively the same. We can see that once we control for some of these methodological concerns and factors, that the relationship between IQ and brain volume, there is none. So I just want to wrap up with this particular section on correlation, coming back and looking again at the roles that methods play in our data. So yes, when you run numbers, you do get numbers, but this is where we have to be critically thinking about statistics. Numbers don't lie per se, but they also don't necessarily involve all of the multiple contextual factors that we necessarily need to have to make a good study. And again, of course, absolutely essential when you're looking at taking decisions about human beings and putting in place social policies.